Welcome, friends, to Called to Be Bold podcast with Claire. Excited that you're here. Hope you're having a wonderful week. It's Monday. Hope that everything is incredible for you this week. I am so excited to have my friend Carol.dodds as my guest today for Called to Be Bold. I have known Carol, well, I guess almost my entire life, right, Carol? Maybe
Yes,
since
yes.
I was 7 years old. My parents, for most of you might not know this, but my parents were in ministry, worked for what was Campus Crusade for Christ, which is now Cru, for many, many years. And we had the opportunity to live in Costa Rica when I was a kid, and we met the Dodds family there. And something that I have just appreciated about my friend Carol, I'll let her introduce herself to you in a minute, but just something that I've appreciated so much is that Carol is an encourager. And not only has she kind of stood on the sidelines for my entire life that I've known her, but also throughout my time as being an abortion survivor, since I've been called to be bold in many areas of my life, she has really spoken truth into my life and just been someone that I can turn to. And I've appreciated that because so often we kind of avoid not only pain, but difficult conversations. And the conversation that we're about to have and the journey that Carol has been on for the past 30 40 years,
Almost 40 years. It's
almost 40
amazing.
years,
Mhm.
has is a journey that I feel needs to be shared, because as pro-lifers, which most of us are that are watching this podcast, we know how to have conversations about abortion. We know how to stand in the gaps and stand up for physical life, human life. But oftentimes we're kind of puzzled. Like, how do I stand in the gap? How do I stand up for the souls of those physical lives that we're fighting for? And so I've been excited to have Carol on as she shares her journey of how she was called to ministry and has been having these important conversations about what Christ has through eternal life, through his sacrifice for us on the cross. And so welcome, Carol. I'm so excited to have you and for you to share with us today.
Well, it is an honor to be here. And Claire, whom I call Lauren Claire, LC, but we will call her Claire on this program, has been someone that I have known, like she mentioned, since she was 7 years old. And I just want to say something about you, Claire, and thank you for your kind words, is that the sweet, kind, empathetic 7-year-old that you were standing on the streets of Costa Rica when I got to know you is the woman that has embraced this incredible life story and calling that you have now. And so I'm just so honored to link arms with you today and talk about important.
Thank you. I'm so excited you're here. Carol, as I mentioned, works for Cru, formerly Campus Crusade for Christ. Her husband is the regional director for Athletes in Action. And then she also works with Encore, providing a ministry for empty nesters. And so I'll let you share a little bit more about that, Carol. But tell us, before you get to that, a little bit about you, who you are, where you live, your family. Just give us a little introduction to you.
I would love to do that. So my husband, Stuart, and I have been married for 35 years. I met him through the ministry of Cru. A Northwestern and a Southern girl got together, and the rest is history. But we have been blessed with 3 grown children who are delightful. And the thing I was thinking about with them is that they are each getting to live out their passions right now and their callings in their workplace in really strong communities with friends and churches. And I know that's something we can't take for granted, but I'm very thankful for their lives. So We are here in Austin with a lot of the Colwell family, and we day to day do Athletes in Action. And I am involved in this Encore ministry for empty nest women as well.
Wonderful. Tell us a little bit about those ministries. What are they? What do you do with those ministries?
Well, thanks for asking. So like Claire mentioned, Athletes in Action, my husband was a collegiate athlete. I'll tell you a little more about that, and an athlete all through his life. So working with Athletes in Action has been a natural choice for us based on his background. But we oversee a 4-state region, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. And our desire is to be a spiritual resource to collegiate athletes in those areas. And we lead the staff in our 4-state region. We have about 40 staff. And our goal is that we would build to 80 staff so that we can have 20 teams of 4 throughout the region, getting an arm's length of every athlete. And we love what we do on a weekly basis. I coach some of the local team leaders, the women. My husband coaches the men. And we do events like winter retreats and summer projects when it's non-COVID years. We just did a virtual winter retreat this year, or not winter retreat, fall retreat, excuse me. So we love what we do, and we've loved being partners in AIA. With Encore, I had a dream. I will tell you more about this, but I grew up in Houston, and I have always had a heart for women, and especially affluent women who I feel like have the means to really impact the world and world for Christ. And so many years ago, I started with a small group in an area of town where some of those women live. And the ministry has grown now, where we have, on non-COVID times, a strong contingency of women. And we're looking at what it means to reach their neighbors, to bring women into a where they can grow. And Encore is because this is kind of our 3rd stage of life. So we want to take the stage and live out of our giftedness. And I do want to say this, I'm probably going a little long with my answer here, but I want to just say that it's important for us to understand our giftedness so that we can be bold. What Lauren Claire's talking about is boldness. And I want to put in a shameless plug for her mother, Barbara Colwell, who is going to be starting tomorrow, Embrace Your Strengths. I wanted to make sure I got it right. And this is going to be shown in December, but it's November the 9th today. So tomorrow it'll be dropping, and it is going to be so amazing. So everybody needs to sign up for that. So that's what these women are kind of discovering in their own lives. And it's been a real joy, no matter what their spiritual backgrounds are, to see them come in, be able to hear the gospel, and then learn how they can live out of that.
I love that. Yeah, thanks for sharing that about my mom's podcast. We did do a little video where I will introduce people to that, because I think that even in the line of work that I do, pregnancy centers should take this assessment and know how they can work within the gifts that God has given them. So incredible. Okay, I have to imagine, you knew me growing up, right? I was an introvert, as you mentioned. I didn't like an argument. I would have probably never really stood up for myself or just done anything that put me in the spotlight, right? And
look what you are now.
People don't believe me when I get on stage, because they're like, you seem like you love it up there. You say things that an introvert wouldn't say. People don't believe me, but the truth that I liked to just kind of stay in my bubble, stay in my comfort zone. And obviously God had a bigger plan. He called me to be bold. He called me to step foot on a stage and share one of the most controversial stories that we've heard in our time. And so I have to imagine that maybe you were like me, and growing up, you had a different plan. Maybe you had something that you were good at, or your husband was good at. You mentioned he had an opportunity to continue his career in football. So maybe that was his alternative plan. But I'm curious, did you think that you would devote your life to ministry as a kid growing up, or was this something that God just put on your heart and really changed the direction of where he would take you and use you?
Well, that's a great question, Claire. Just to share a little bit that I touched on about my upbringing, I grew up in a very caring, social, affluent background in Houston, and I was gifted with many life opportunities. And so growing up, I feel like my parents modeled what it looked like to be interested in people and to ask questions and to care. And little did I know that God would redeem that and use that in my ministry with Crew. So I didn't know anybody from my background that was doing what I was doing. I had become a Christian through Young Life in high school, and then in college I was discipled through Campus Crusade, now Crew. I had some people in my life like Nancy Mink and Carolyn Wyatt and Rich Van Houten who just challenged me to consider giving my life eternally and as a staff member with Christ. So I came home and talked to my parents about it, and they blessed my decision, even though they knew nobody from this who was doing something like this. I raised support, which was something very different as well. And, you know, the rest is history, but I love the verse, and I'm going to tell you about my husband too, but I love the verse, 1 Corinthians 15:10, talking about Paul. He says, "For by grace I am what I am." And so God takes all the good and bad in our backgrounds, and mine, for all the good, there were also things that I'm living differently than the way I was raised. And that's all part of being human. You know, we all make choices, but he has taken all of that and made me who I am today, warts and all. And I am so grateful for what I saw modeled on caring for people, because I know that God has been able to use that in an eternal way in the ministry, in my relationships with people. So my husband also had a unique, so what I say is God plucked me out. That's the phrase I use. He plucked me out for something that he had that was something very eternal. Stuart, who many miles away from me, also became a Christian through Young Life. So shout out to Young Life. Got involved in Campus Crusade at Montana State University, where his brothers had played football. Stuart was playing football and basketball in college. And he had a very successful sports career. So out of college, he was drafted to play with the San Diego Chargers. God ended up shutting that door. And then he went on to consider Crew. Well, in the middle of considering that, he got another offer from the Pittsburgh Steelers. So here he was sitting in a little chapel in San Bernardino, California at our headquarters saying, "Lord, I have another chance. They want to start me. I know the coach, and then I've got Campus Crusade." And he felt like God clearly said, "I've shut that door. I want you to live for the eternal. I want you to make this decision." And of course, a lot of his friends thought he was crazy. I mean, his friends wanted him to go in pro football because then, they'd be able to support his ministry friends if he was a pro football player. And then they also, just the fame of it. But he chose that path. And because of that, we met, we were married, we've raised 3 children who by God's grace know Jesus and are making an impact. So it is amazing the choices we make, Claire.
It's incredible. I mean, I remember growing up knowing that about your husband. And I remember, I know it was like a conversation that we had as kids with your girls, and my sister and I are similar age. We kind of grew up with Carol's kids. But we used to think like, he is so cool. I mean, he played football. I mean, we didn't know anybody else who had played college football and who, had an offer from the NFL. But I think big picture, what an impact that had on our life growing up, knowing that he could have done these things that would have been very gratifying, that would have been something really cool to talk about and brag about and whatever. But he chose to be bold, and he chose to be obedient. And I've seen that throughout the past 25 years that I've known you, as you have been thrown into other roles and been given other opportunities, as you have just consistently chosen to obey God and honor the calling that he has had on your life and on Stuart's life. What does your day-to-day ministry look like? And kind of backstory a little bit more for me. Will you give me just a few more details about what it looked like to actually join staff, what the journey has been like from then to now as you share your day-to-day ministry life in Austin?
Yes, thank you. Well, as I mentioned, I joined staff in 1982, Stuart in 1980, and we have lived, around the country and out of the country in Costa Rica, which I know we're going to talk about a little more. But we've worked with different venues of the ministry. But like I said, the last 11 years, we've worked with Athletes in Action. And the thing that really is compelling about our day-to-day job is the change lives. I mean, the conversations you have that end up. So, for example, I just have to share, but there was a soccer player named Brooke, and she was a D1, athlete at the University of Texas. She was the most outstanding soccer in the state of Washington her senior year and got recruited to come to Texas.
Wow.
I met her freshman year. She had put her faith in Christ, and she came to one of our Athletes in Action Bible studies, and her cousin had said, "You need to be discipled." And so we got in a conversation. We ended up getting in a discipleship relationship for the first half of her college career. And ironically, she ended up being discipled the second half of her college career by Claire's sister, Rachel Colwell Buchanan, and they became best friends and were in each other's weddings. So God knit it all together, but Brooke counted the cost. She even got down to a pro soccer opportunity, but she ended up going into the ministry. And now she and her husband are leading the ministry at the University of Texas with Athletes in Action. So those are the kind of things, Claire, that day in, day out, and those don't happen every day. It's just faithfully having conversations, making sure our staff are knowing how to get to our prayers, that we would have 20 teams of 4, that they can get to the scope on multiple campuses to share Christ with athletes and disciple them. So that's kind of the way that looks day in, day out. We're doing it from a distance as the regional directors. Yeah.
I want to get to kind of the conversations that you have with people as you share the gospel, as you have these bold conversations with athletes. But before we get to that, I want to talk about Costa Rica. And listeners, today you're going to hear more stories in my book that's coming out in April about my experience in Costa Rica, because as I mentioned, our families did live there for a short time during the same time period, but Carol and her family were there for a lot longer. And so I'm interested. I mean, gosh, I think, okay, from an affluent family to Costa Rica, from a NFL, opportunity to moving your family to a different country, different world, all for the sake of souls that are lost, all for the sake of the gospel. And I just wonder, I mean, what got you to that point of making the decision to go to Costa Rica? What was it like living there? How did students or people in general in Costa Rica respond to the gospel as you shared it with them in that country?
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for asking. I think I'm preaching to the choir with this audience, because you all know what it's like when God gives you a calling that is so compelling that you can't even imagine not doing it, because it's just a natural. And that's when I came to Christ in high school and then in college, I became overwhelmed by the need to share the gospel and to live intentionally in a purposeful life. And so again, that's what you all are doing. And so Costa Rica was no different than if we did something in the United States. It was just a natural overflow. God clearly led us there. There was one funny story when we were living in Colorado and working with crew where I did an old-fashioned pro-con list. And I went down in our basement to show my husband I had done a pro-con list. And as I walked into the room, he was literally writing a pro-con list at the same time. And we both were standing there with our pro-con list. And it was that God was leading us to go to this other country for such a time as this. So that's kind of a cool story how that happened. But while we were there, Claire, what we did is we were there during the school year. And then in the summers, we had groups of students from the United States come in for our summer projects, which honestly are one of the best things that Cru does. And so the Colwells came during part of that time and were involved in one of the summer projects with us as well. But so what happened was we went to the English department at the University of Costa Rica and told students, we're here, with the ministry, and we would love to help you with your English. And so we would hang out in this soda, is what we called it, like a cafeteria, and have these conversations with students. So one of the things I want to make here about bridging conversations is you want to find common ground with people. Always. So you and the pro-life ministry, that's what you do. You come alongside people who have a common cause wherever they are in their spiritual journey, right? And so that's what we were doing. We came and said, here's the English language. They wanted to learn the English language. Well, that first summer, we met a young man named Carlos, who was from a very low means upbringing, was raised, in a way that none of us could have probably fathomed, right? And one of our students, Randy, ended up using the 4 spiritual laws, which now this is one of the Cru's materials. And we're going to give you resources that you can look at these things and know that there are things that are transferable. You don't have to create the gospel. You don't have to figure it out. You can literally read through an outline that people have been working on for decades and decades, who've been in ministry and who have more expertise in this. So it's easy because you just read through and we would ask people, can we get your opinion on this? Everybody likes to give their opinion, right? So we would do that in the English department. So Randy did this with Carlos. Carlos put his faith in Christ. He was so overjoyed with getting these materials that we tell the story that he went and laminated all of them. Like, would we even think of doing that? I mean, he went and put plastic on all of them to preserve them because they were like gold. Sweet. And so he came to Christ. He got involved in our ministry. Well, little do we know that a year later, his amazing and beautiful wife of 16 years, we just calculated, would be going to the Jesus film that we were showing on our second summer project since we were there. You might have been there during that time, Claire. I don't remember the overlap, but she put her faith in Christ. She was an amazing student in the business school, University of Costa Rica, very articulate, out to change the world, and as a businesswoman, and God got a hold of her heart. They got in the leadership together, fell in love, got married, and now they've been serving with Cru for, yes, over 15 to 20 years in Costa Rica with 2 beautiful children, and we've stayed best of friends. So that is kind of the progression of sharing the gospel that we saw take place in Costa Rica. And I will say too, just for the fun of it, we had this long sidewalk from our house to the Colwell's house. And our little 5 and 7-year-old girls would run back and forth, and it was kind of a little, cracks in the sidewalk and girls falling and girls fighting. But Lauren Claire never fought. She was always like, no, don't fight. Anyway, that was just a fun little memory. But we love doing ministry and living life with the Colwells and sharing the gospel with college students in Costa Rica.
I love that. I mean, can you imagine how different our world would be if we were all a Carlos? I mean, laminating something that changed his life, that saved his life, and just holding on to that as precious as it is. I feel like a lot of times we as believers, we put our faith in Christ. We're excited for a little bit, but then it can wear off, and we can go about our day-to-day life, and we don't even stop to think, I could be sharing this with others. And so that's why I'm so blessed that you agreed to share with us today, because I want people to have an opportunity to know and be encouraged that they too can have these conversations, and that they too can be a part of reaching the lost with the gospel.
Right.
Before we get to that, I feel like that's going to be our big moment. I'm really excited about just hearing how you go about that conversations. But you mentioned that your family lived in Costa Rica, that there was that sidewalk, and your girls, I'm sure, ran up and down that sidewalk all along. My parents tell a story about how when I went to the school there, I didn't really like it at first, and so I would hold on to this stop sign and never let go. And it actually, my dad feels bad about it, because he said, maybe he didn't handle it in the best way, but they remember it more than I did. But it reminds me of the year that my family lived in Mexico, and y'all weren't there during that time, but we lived in Mexico for a year with crew as well. And I would say that that was the best year of my entire childhood. I mean, life-changing, absolutely incredible. I was able to go to a Spanish-speaking school, made completely different friends. I was dreaming in Spanish by the time we got back to the States a year later. But really, honestly, the most impactful year of my entire childhood. And so with your daughters, Rachel and Michelle, I'm curious, like, how has it been for them having parents in ministry? What was it like for them moving to another country? And then as they've become adults in their 30s, like I have and my sister has, have they been able to look back and point to impactful moments of their time being raised by missionary parents?
Well, that's a great question. And I think of this saying, more is caught than taught. And obviously that goes in good and bad directions. We did not perfectly raise our children. We had plenty of mistakes along the way, but God is greater than those. And I think just making the statement of going to Costa Rica, and while we were there, our third, as Barbara Colwell calls him, Prince Jared, was born too. And he has got dual citizenship, which is pretty cool. Okay. So anyway, Jared came along as our caboose, but Rachel, interesting, our oldest daughter went on to be a Spanish major at the University of Texas. She has been able to use her Spanish to translate on mission trips, to make a bridge. She's a bridge builder anyway. That's who she is. Michelle, presently a business ministry situation. And so they both have had these hearts to continue to disciple. Jared is in the middle of a group of Christian guys involved at a church, thinking that way with his life choices. So I do think when, and I know the Colwells and us would say, we are living for something far beyond our family. And so if we model that with our kids and even have these evangelistic conversations with people in our neighborhoods, people in our work, wherever, if you're in full-time ministry or not, the kids are going to notice that. They're going to pick up on that. And obviously there's going to be the things that are hard too. I'm not trying to paint a perfect picture. I think growing up in ministry can be hard for kids. Sometimes I think they have to go in reverse a little bit, where some kids who've never seen that, it's like new and fresh. Whereas for kids in ministry, it can be like, oh, wah, wah, I've been around this. But I think ultimately when they grow up, and you're an example of this, your sister's an example of this, they say, this is the God I love and the God I know, and I want to serve him. So,
well, y'all have modeled it so well. Well, I would love for you now to share just what does it look like to have that conversation on a college campus with an athlete, with your neighbor, with your long lost cousin, with your business partner. I mean, we could go on and on about the opportunities that every single one of us day in and day out have to have meaningful conversations and to share the gospel specifically. And so I'd love for you to just kind of paint a picture of what it looks like when you go start this conversation. What kind of things do you say? What is impactful to people? You mentioned that you have some resources to share as well. I think that our listeners will really appreciate that as they navigate what does it look like for me as a mom, as a business person, as an athlete, as a high school student. I mean, we have a variety of listeners here from all different walks of life who may be wondering, what does it look like for me to really get out there, to really pursue having these conversations that truly matter, who truly point people to what Christ did for them so that they too can trust him as their savior and live eternally with him.
So I wanted to share about my neighbors because that's an area I haven't talked about. Before I share that, I have to share one story from when I was in college because I know that there are younger listeners listening to this who are involved in ministries. But when I was in college, I went on a trip to Europe one summer. I was very blessed, obviously, to get to do that. But there was a girl on the trip who was a very influential young girl named Rini, a sorority girl at the University of Texas. Because I had been trained in how to share the 4 spiritual laws and how to present the gospel, I was equipped with that on my trip. And I had my little booklets with me, I had my Bible. And one day we were cruising, I think it was through the Corinth Canal or something crazy, but we went on top of the boat. I went through the 4-point outline with Rini Harwood, and she was very receptive, but I couldn't tell like what her heart or if she made a decision at that point, but I knew I had done what God wanted me to do. Well, probably about 10 years ago or 5 years ago, I was at a University of Texas football game and she was there and she found me and she said, Carol, you are part of my testimony because you shared with me on top of that boat. And so that was a crazy story. But with my neighbors, like I said earlier, the way I put it is, the woman next door to me or the woman across the street, she wants to be a good mom, just like I want to be a good mom. And when our kids were young, in our first neighborhood here in Austin, we really lived life as young moms together. And we would play bunco, we'd go walking, we'd do things. So in the course of that, I would invite, a lot of times, a great thing for a great bridge for evangelism is inviting women to events. Like we'd have this beautiful Christmas event at our church where the tables were all decorated beautifully and they would hear the gospel. And so after those events, I would get together one-on-one with the women and I would go through the gospel again to make sure they had understood it. Well, one of the women that I invited, named Gina, beautiful woman, she had gone with me to an event. We had walked, we had done all this. But again, you don't always see the decision right then. Well, just last year, I went to my mailbox one day and I had gone through the 4-point decision with her, but I got a letter. I didn't recognize the address. And I opened it and it was like, hi, Carol, we had lost touch. She said, this is Gina. I felt led to write you. You went through the 4-point, or I don't think she said 4-point, but you went through the gospel. I want you to know I've given my life to Christ. We're raising our kids in this way. And I'm so grateful that as a young mom that you lived life with me and did that. And again, it really is it's just living life. Some of the questions that I can think of another neighbor. One time our son was 5 years old. He's 26 now. So he threw a football over our fence. I went around, took his hand. We walked around the street and a beautiful lady was out raking, her leaves. I am never stylish, but I guess I had cute shoes on that day. Tommy Hilfiger. And she said, I love your sandals. I started talking to her, holding Jared's hand. I said to her, do you have a church family here? And maybe that question wouldn't go over as well now. You could say, where are you? Or how would you describe your spiritual journey or anything that could open the door? She ended up saying, I did have that background, but I've been away from it. Anyway, we ended up getting together. She recommitted her life to Christ. She asked me if I could meet with her neighbors on her street. And then she took the booklet that I had shared and put it on her nightstand. She told me a couple days later, she saw her husband on his knees by the side of his bed. and he had given his life to Christ. They have now been ministry supporters of ours, and he's been in a small group with Stuart for many years. Crazy story. That doesn't happen every day, but it was a simple asking questions. Where are you? You know, do you have a church family? Can you give me your opinion on this gospel? This has really changed my life, my husband's life. It's just simply making a connection with the mom next door. Oh, my kid's struggling. My kid's struggling. This motherhood thing is hard. God is hope. You know, let's meet there. Or I'm committed to the pro-life ministry. So are you. Let's talk about it. Let's meet there. God is our hope in the middle of this. Or whatever your cause is, having that common ground, where you're from. Oh, I'm from Houston. You're from Houston. Awesome. But, you know, so really that would be my biggest encouragement whenever you're with someone. Find the common ground, ask them, would you mind, you know, if I could get your opinion on something that's really changed my life, pull it out. So one of the things, I don't know if you want me to share about resources now.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So Claire's going to show this to y'all later, and I've already mentioned it, but there's something that you can now get on your phone that's called God Tools. And in the context of that, you can download the app. In the context of that, it has all the gospel presentations. It has hard questions people ask. So all you do is download this app. And I have been sitting at my husband's 20-year high school reunion and got in a conversation with a lady and pulled my phone out and started going through it in the middle of a bar. I mean, it doesn't matter where you are, that you can share these things with people, these outlines. So you pick the one that you're comfortable with. And I'm going to leave my email too. If you ever want to talk to me about sharing the gospel or I'd be so happy to be a resource to any of your viewers. And I would just encourage you to pick one of the formats that you're most comfortable with, buy some of those materials, or download the app on your phone. That makes it real easy. The nice thing about buying some of the hard copies, like we were saying about Carlos laminating, is you can leave them with them. I had a college student once call me and say, I was cleaning out my desk and I found the 4 spiritual laws with your name and phone number. I gave my life to Christ. I just wanted you to know her name's Jennifer. And I was like, whoa. And if I hadn't left that booklet with her, and these aren't stories that happen every day. I'm kind of sharing kind of the big stories, you know, but normally, I mean, we don't know until eternity the lives that are going to be, you know, a lot of people will never see, will never know. But anyway, those are just a bunch of different stories I wanted to share with you all.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. You know, as far as a lot of our viewers today, oftentimes we as pro-lifers, we're told from people who disagree with us that we are pro-birthers, meaning we only care about getting the baby to be born and then we do nothing afterwards. That's not true. There are a lot of organizations who are doing something, but I do think there's something to that. So I think that as far as people who are watching today, who are listening today, who are already on board with the pro-life conversations, with being bold for things that matter in regards to life, I think that we're really equipping y'all today because they can't say that we're pro-birthers if we truly care about the life of that child after they're born. And the most important way that we can care for the lives of the people that are being saved from abortion is by caring for their souls. And so I'm excited about being able to, I will put this up on the screen. You should be looking at it now if you're watching. If you are listening, I will put it in the description of the podcast, so you can reach out to Carol so that you can see these resources and tools that are available to you, because every single one of us can be having these conversations, can be asking these important questions that get the to point people to what Christ did for them, because nothing else matters without that. So thank you for sharing that. I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this question, but I just want to dig a little bit more into what you're doing with empty nesters before we close, because like me, I'm sure a lot of our viewers are in this stage of motherhood. But kind of, I don't know, when I thought about asking this question, I'm like, it kind of hurts a little bit to even think that one day I'll be an empty nester. And I know that people will be hearing a story in my book that's coming out in April, how you came to visit me when Sadie June was born. And this might make me cry.
And me too.
But I remember when you walked in that day and I was holding Sadie, or no, you were holding Sadie June, I guess. And maybe it wasn't even this day, but from my recollection, it was. I think maybe you had said this to me before. Even Sadie June was born, but because of some circumstances behind her birth that will be shared in my book, you came up to me and you said, Claire, God's not done writing your story yet. And to this day, that has been the most impactful thing that someone said to me when Sadie June was when I was pregnant with her after she gave birth, because it gave me so much hope, and it painted a picture of how God saw the big picture when I didn't, of how God wrote this story for my life. Another story, kind of like when I found out that I had survived an abortion, another story that I never envisioned for myself, but God had written this story perfectly, and he was going to use it. And so I'm curious, just kind of want people to have a better picture of what you're doing with empty nesters, what connections, what resources, what is available to people who feel like maybe I do right now, that when my kids grow up, I might lose some of my identity, but to know that that's not true, that is just God writing your story continuously and continuously, even if it changes, even if your life story changes, that who you are is not defined by your circumstances. It's not defined by what you've done. It's defined by what God says about you. And regardless of what stage of life you're in, that never changes. So I'm interested just to know how people like me, who will be empty nesters one day, people like you who are already empty nesters, what is available to them through this ministry?
Yes. Well, I think when you get to this stage of life, you've had a lot of life beaten out of you. You've been through a lot of hard things. You've been through a lot of joys. In most cases, you've raised your children. Your children are getting married. They're having children themselves. You're becoming grandmothers. There's so many things going on in your life, and it's easy, though all of those things are high callings in our life, to focus on our grown children, to focus on our grandchildren, very high calling. But I really believe God also has purposes for us individually in our areas of passion. And again, back to Barbara Colwell, embracing your strengths, knowing who you are and what you're made for in life is so important. And so our desire is to give women a safe place. Many of the women that are in our particular group here in Austin come from kind of the backgrounds that I grew up in Houston. They are in a more affluent area. They've had, in many cases, husbands who've been very successful. Some of them have been very successful, obviously, in their own right. And so now they're at a place where, what do I do? I have time. A lot of them have the money. We have that. So what do I do with it all? And so the thought of partnering with these women so we can change the world, whether it's through pro-life, sharing the gospel, doing, whatever their calling and passion is, these kind of women can change the world. And so I think one of my mentors says, Carol, speak out of your wise woman voice. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I've got so many issues in my life and weaknesses, but we can kind of speak out of our wise woman voice at this stage because we've had the tar beat out of us in a lot of cases, which is usually what we all know produces character in our lives, right? Suffering often does. So that is really what's behind that. I actually had a dream, Lauren Claire, when I was, I don't know, I've had it for about 20 years. I was standing in a room at the Houston Country Club where I grew up, running around. You were there for my sister's wedding. And we were in this beautiful room with pink roses and everything was lovely. And there was all these women sitting there that looked so perfect on the outside and had these really successful lives, but they were hurting. And I have dreamed of standing up in those places and saying, we can be imperfect because we have a perfect God who gives us hope. And just to share with them like a safe place for them to come. And I think a lot of these women need a safe place. So that's what's behind it. Of course, we're in COVID season now, so we're doing everything virtually. It's kind of taken, it's hard for all of us to do stuff virtually, but we're hopeful in the future. And just like athletes, just like neighbors, 2 Timothy 2:2, where Paul says, the things I have, imparted to you in the presence of many witnesses, these pass on to faithful men and women who will be able to impact others also and multiply their lives. So our desire is that they would reach out to their neighbors, the athletes would reach out to their teammates, our neighbors would reach out to other people in their lives, that this is just not about stopping with us. So
yeah,
thank you.
I love that. When I think of someone that is truly stepping out boldly for things that matter, I think of someone like you. And so I would love it if you would just say a couple sentences of encouragement to the listener, the viewer here today who is wondering, what can I do? I can use my influence, my connections, my resources, my talents, my just willingness to be obedient, as you and Stuart have been in your walk to share the gospel with others, to devote your life to ministry. What would you say to the person who's thinking, maybe I can do that too? Maybe I can step out of my comfort zone and truly have conversations that matter, including using the tools that Carol has given me to save souls.
Thank you. I think there are two things that come to mind. One is a daily meeting with Jesus Christ in your own life, that we cannot impart what we don't possess. So we have to be possessors of the Lord in our own lives, knowing him intimately like we would a friend. You're not going to become close to your friend or your spouse or anybody apart from spending time with them. And so it is the same thing. That is the first thing. If you don't know how to have a regular time with the Lord, this leads into the second thing. Have a mentor in your life. Have somebody that can disciple you. Be intentional and say, will you teach me? Just like I'm not a great cook. I would go to Barbara Colwell and say, will you teach me how to be a better cook? Because she's a great cook. But it's like you have to go to a person and be intentional. We don't just coast in our lives and expect to grow in whatever area. So having a quiet time, and not just quiet time to check the box, but meeting with the Lord on a regular basis, having a mentor, and then do the next thing, whatever that next thing is in your life. We don't know, and Elizabeth Elliot, who's a great Christian woman of the faith who lived in Ecuador, her husband was martyred for his faith. She would just say on a daily basis, Lord, help me do the next thing. And I have to say, Claire Colwell does that with all her nest of children, 4 of them. And with your incredible ministry through pro-life, I know you know what that means, Claire, to do the next thing. And that's what we have to do. We listen to God one step at a time. He gives us the light for our path for the next step. So that's how I would respond to that.
He sure does. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I feel better equipped right now just to go out and love people, as you have been such an incredible example of that. Love people well and have the important conversations that truly matter. So I appreciate you joining me. How can people contact you if they're listening today? For those that are viewing, we'll put it up on the screen, but how can people contact you?
I would love for you to just leave my email. We are working on a Facebook page for our Empty Nest ministry, and COVID kind of stopped that a little short, but we are planning on doing that. So stay tuned for that, any of you women who would be at that stage of life. But just email me and we can get the conversation going. And I love you, Claire, and I thank you so much for the honor, and thanks for what you're doing and all of you viewers are doing to change the world. And we're behind you all the way. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, if you're listening, I hope you enjoyed our time with Carol. Join me next week. Subscribe to Called to Be Bold on your podcast platforms, and we will hear from someone else who is doing something for things that matter. God bless.